Hey, family, this is Bishop John Seldens, and I'm here once again, delighted, godly, proud, and pleased to be coming to you on this airway. Let me say it like that. These what we call relevant conversations. I get the opportunity, and I giggle because I get the opportunity to talk to folk who I like. Who for whatever reason their work intrigues me, or their personality is just radiant. And can I just be a little bit of faithy and churchy for a moment? Sometimes it's the spirit that just moves me when I connect to some of the folk we have over these many weeks and months that we talk to. And tonight, we in for another kind of treat. This young man, who we're going to be in conversation with for the next little bit of time, has been a leader. I got to know him from a distance. For a number of years, had heard his name mentioned in some of the work and some of the justice work we had been doing in and around reproductive health and rights. And his name kept coming up. And then we got to meet each other in the early mid first decade of the 2000s. And then we got the opportunity to work much closer together. And then all of a sudden, we start showing up at the same spots. I mean, I wouldn't know he was going to be there, and he wouldn't know I was going to be there. And all of a sudden, we at the thing. You ever meet somebody, and you've known them for a long time? This is who this person is to me. And I'll say a bit more about, or he may even say a bit more about where he hails from, and what has been his business these many years. One that we've known each other, but we were just talking a bit ago, and so I don't apologize for speaking in the language of my peoples. I don't apologize it at all. My people speaks a kind of Ebonics. I know I'm supposed to call it African American English, but it's Ebonics to me. And then there's another piece on that. Many of the folk that I come from didn't have the education that I've been allowed, and that both he and I have been allowed to participate in. But they had another kind of education. They had another kind of knowing. They had another way of processing how God moves and the spirit of the movement of God. I'm channeling Howard Thurman just a little bit there. When I talk about movement in the spirit, the movement of the spirit, he would name it as such. Let me just bring to this platform physician, author, advocate, activist. I'm gonna say it this way: bootleg preacher. He wouldn't say it that way, but bootleg preacher. Let me bring to my friend and my brother, our colleague in the struggle for justice and freedom and equality, Dr. Willie J. Parker. Come on, greet the peoples, brother.
Greetings and salutations, my brother. My kinfolk. I was just, my heart was stirring in me as you were introducing me. I felt humbled and honored, and to just be in. I feel humbled and honored to be in this space and to embrace our kinship. I couldn't have said it more better. I couldn't have been more entertained. I couldn't have been more. I couldn't be more flattered with your introduction. So thank you for sharing breath, for sharing spirit, for sharing space, and standing in solidarity to do all that is right and good. So greetings and salutations to you, my brother.
Absolutely, Brand. It's been a little bit since we've been in each other's direct company in space, but we had the opportunity a little bit ago to reconnect after having not been in direct conversation and connection with one another. And listen, it was like no time had passed, and that's the miracle I believe that is gifted to us when we operate in the spirit. In the spirit,
Absolutely.
there's time, and then there's time that doesn't have time. And so it's like that, and I have very few, but I do have a number of kinfolk, or I would say kind kinfolk,
Mhm.
who we pick up where we left out. We won't talk for months maybe at a time, and then all of a sudden, the time will come, we'll connect, and it'll be like we hadn't missed anything. And for me, it was just like that with you. And I appreciate you very much for all the work that you do. Let's jump in, man, and talk a
Absolutely.
little bit about who you are, and the work that caused you to do what you do. Let's go back. Let's go back a little bit to where are you from? I happen to know the answer to this question,
Sure,
but
sure.
for our folk here, did you talk about where were you reared at, and who your kinfolk? Who is your mama and them?
That's a question. Who your folk is something I grew up with, and recently I know people have been giving tribute to and trying to decentralize colonialized America and the obliteration of the history of people of color. So I'm the descendant of captured Africans who were brought to the land of the Alabama tribe, the Creek, the Choctaw, Chickasaw, in the state, was now the state of Alabama. I was brought forth in Birmingham, Alabama, 60 years ago. So I am the descendant of people who hoped against no hope, grew up in uh, abject poverty. I said we were poor. We had the PO. We couldn't afford the OR, so we weren't poor. We were poor. All right. But I didn't figure that out until I began to apply to school and do things where the metrics gauged you by your economic standing. And so we were materially challenged, but we were never challenged with love and concern. So I'm from, if I wanted to sing a sad song, I'm a poor black boy from Alabama, but I'm a person that God saw and put me in the arms of a nurturing mother who had 6 kids. We had 6 different fathers, but I didn't know lack because my mother was a nurturing person. So I come from a place where our shared kinship around Howard Thurman. I was born into circumstances where I grew up with my back against the wall. And that's why the gospel spoke to me so profoundly which I became a Christian at the age of 15. So Christian man from Alabama 60 years ago, still on that. That's where I started and been on the journey ever since.
Thank you, brother. And you are certainly a child of the Turtle Island South. Uh, Amen. And I too come. My people come from Creek folk, and from Mississippi and Alabama, and Arkansas and Louisiana. That's how they would say it. They would say Mississippi, not Mississippi, Mississippi.
Yeah.
And we shared that. We have that kinship and that kindship, I call it. And then you went on to school. That didn't block you because of where your beginnings. And while you may have been poor, you were rich in so many other ways. That now at our ages, you get to look at that and say, man, there was another kind of thing going on there. Yeah, we may not have some greenback, but we got some stuff that I wouldn't take nothing from a journey.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah,
right?
that providence, the sense of purpose that I gained when my relationship with God became personal, and my conversion experience as a Christian at age 15 propelled me to have a sense of purpose, where I did well in school, and I went on to major in science and go to medical school and became a physician, and chose the craft of obstetrics and gynecology, which became the area that where God put me in a place where I had to really explore my values around justice. Being born a male and choosing not to engage in patriarchy. Being born with brown skin, but not feeling inferior because people told me that I wasn't supposed to do the things that I've done. And so it was in that context that I learned that my purpose and calling, besides being a boy preacher who ran from that, but as you know, Bishop, the gifts and callings of God are without repentance. So while I had never had a pulpit ministry, being a voice crying in the wilderness, I came to understand that calling in a different way, that I was equipped with gifts that when I stood on the platform to call for justice, for reproduction and those kinds of things, that the ability to paint word pictures and to kind of put truth out into the ether with the courage that God would speak as long as I open my mouth and let my tongue move, prompted me to have the hybrid calling of being a healer as a physician in reproductive health, but also a voice crying for justice, understanding that if I couldn't ask for or seek the rights of the people who come to me for healthcare to change the context in which they live, I was only doing half of the mission.
This is so this is a very interesting, I'll call it a nexus point, a kind of crossroad where multiple streams of both consciousness and calling come together. We were talking earlier, I thought that I would spend the majority of my career doing music, and really had thought, while the musician in me was the side hustle, I thought I would formalize my career in the production side, as a audio engineer and recording tech. And who knew? Well, there's several people knew. I didn't know that the preaching would become the thing. So that at a point, the ministry of music became the ministry of the spoken word for me, and the pastorate and the ministry of call and response became the thing. Could you talk a little bit about where that happened? I mean, as we have talked a number of times over the time we've known each other, that thing that gets on you because the mothers and the fathers, the sainted ones in our churches see it in you. And they certainly called it forth as far as I was concerned. And I know they did it with you as well. I was the one that had all the long Easter speeches, every time there was a speech had to be said, they would say, "Where Little John at?" And here we go. And I had to learn it. It was years before I really realized that I was dyslexic. And what God gave me was an ability to remember rhyme and to remember sentences and whole paraphrase. I was able to do that very quickly while reading was very, very difficult and hard for me. So,
Mhm.
so it's funny to me now that part of my living comes from publicly reading.
Sure.
But there is this place where those things kind of run concurrently, and then they kind of come. When and where did that happen for you?
Sure. You evoke so many things, Bishop. I didn't know that my early public speaking life was that the training was the Easter speeches in the church and the Christmas pageants. And when people say, "Oh, where did you learn to speak? You're so eloquent, you're so elegant, and you're so articulate." And that's sometimes a loaded phrase, but that early sense of, I've come to appreciate that your God invests us all with gifts, and your gifts make room for you. And I didn't know when I had this sense of calling as a new born again Christian and had a sense of purpose. And I went in the Baptist church and said, I got this calling on my life. They said, good, we're going to prepare you for your trial sermon. And I, at 18, was in the pulpit, but it didn't sit well with me about a calling to a pulpit ministry. But I came to a later understanding that calling was to a calling to live a public witness of justice. And it at first it seemed kind of mutually exclusive to be uh, fascinated with science and to become a science major and to study biology and then to go to medical school. Uh, and was I rejecting the calling? Only to came to find that God's callings are without repentance, and the gift of speaking truth was lying in waiting to be utilized in the context of me having chosen the career of being a women's health provider and being a Christian who hadn't done the values clarification about what it meant to be a doctor and a reproductive health person, and to now be in an era where folk were saying that one of the most essential services that women and pregnant people need when they have an unplanned pregnancy is the ability to end that pregnancy with dignity and safety, if that's what they're led to do, or if their health requires them to do that. And so for the first 12 years of my practice as an OBGYN, I did not provide abortion care because I was conflicted about what it meant to provide the care, because I hadn't done the values clarification and I didn't have the theology that I had to work out for myself later around the sanctity of that work. But for the first 12 years, I didn't have that understanding. And so I did not provide abortions for women when they asked me for them because I couldn't reconcile the rhetoric of abortion is murder that came about in 1980 with the assent of the moral majority. And we can talk about the politics and the social stigma around abortion. But I didn't run. I just erred on the side of not violating my conscience until I got the clarity, until I could hear God call me to that ministry. The first 12 years of my practice, I didn't provide that care. And it came to a head when I was in Hawaii on the faculty at the University of Hawaii, and an administrator took away that service, which was liberally provided to women without concern in that state, one of the few states that was permissive. And I wasn't providing the care because I had colleagues who could. But when he took that away, I was listening to a sermon by Dr. King where it was actually the mountaintop sermon where he, on several occasions, but this time he described what made the Good Samaritan good. And in substance, you know the story all too well. You preached it, I'm sure, a million times. But he said that what made the Good Samaritan good was on the road where this person who was an injured traveler and everybody's passing him by, including the priest and the Levite and people who had maybe a cultural and social duty to help him, but they passed him by. The Samaritan, who was a cultural outsider, who had no social duty or responsibility, stop and help. And Dr. King said that what made the Good Samaritan good was his ability to reverse the question of concern. And whereas everybody else passed and said, what'll happen to me if I stop to help this person, the Samaritan asked, what'll happen to this person if I don't stop to help? And in the way we do oftentimes when we're convicted, Bishop, I read myself into that story. And when I read myself into that story, the fallen and injured traveler was the pregnant women and pregnant people who came with an unplanned, untimed pregnancy or a dangerous pregnancy and asked me for help. And I was the Samaritan. And the question for me became not what will happen to me in a country that has become rabidly anti-reproductive health and has sought to seize power by controlling the reproduction of people and leveraging that for political gain. the question became not what will happen to me if I help these women. The question became, what will happen to these women if I don't? And that conviction was profound enough to overcome any anxiety I had about people might harm me, people trying to harm me, because I provided this service that I came to see as a sacrament and a blessing. And as every good and perfect gift comes down from above, the Father of lights, just as Gandhi said that Jesus would not appear to a hungry man except in the form of bread, what else can we appear to a woman who has an ill-timed pregnancy except with the grace of providing a safe medical procedure to help her to understand that acting in her own interest is not to act outside the wisdom and the benevolence and the providence of God, because I see this service that I'm providing as the grace of God towards people who need it.
So you're one of the early people that I listened to and passionately grappled with the struggle that both our teaching, our background, and our own experiences bring to these kinds of conversations. And that's why I'm happy that I have a platform that I don't have to ask no permission to engage in some conversations that I think are both helpful and healthy, right? And to challenge convention. First off, that's okay. We're gonna go here with this Good Samaritan story, and those folk who know me, this is one of my. This is why I can sit up in this one for a minute as a gospel preacher. I think absolutely this story embraces us. And in fact, that's what the gospel does. It elicits us to be engaged and to put ourselves, in fact, even when we don't do it directly, indirectly, we are those people in these stories that come from the parables of the gospels, for example. And that's just one tradition. The Muslims and Jewish and other faiths, others of sacred texts and sacred writings have these similar traditions of storytelling, right? In this particular case, absolutely, it is the job of the Good Samaritan, let's call it that, to take care of the injured party, make sure they get to safety, put the American Express card on it, and put them up in a hotel and take care of them. But then what you just named, and it reminded me of what that scripture often suggests to me, that we have a responsibility to the road. That Jericho road, and I've actually been on that Jericho road, coming down from Jerusalem down into Jericho. Jerusalem is in a mountain. As the mountains are about Jerusalem, so is the Lord about his people. Are you getting ready to make me start preaching? I feel it. I feel the spirit of preaching coming on me right now.
I feel that fire in your bones. You can't shut it up.
Listen, you come down, it is up high, it's in elevation, Jerusalem is, and you come down the road down to Jericho. Jericho is at the very ground zero. In fact, it is said the Dead Sea is right on the Jericho is right on the Dead Sea, and it is the lowest point, it is said, in the world, not just the United States, in the world. It's the lowest point in altitude in the world. Don't we have a responsibility not only to ensure that Pookie and Ray Ray and them don't be jacking people on that road, but let me just say this from my perspective. I need to care about Pookie and Ray Ray.
Yes.
I got responsibility to Pookie and Ray. There are events, there are circumstances, there is a context that the way they get by is by jacking people on the road. I know I'm talking real good for some folks. It is our responsibility and our challenge to live into the kind of spirituality that would take into consideration not only the injured party, that's the obvious injured party, but maybe the folk that are on that road that may not be injured for the way you see injury, or that may not need support or justice the way you see it, but that there is a holistic way that we are responsible as people of faith and people of the book and people of God. We've got to deal with what are our responsibilities and what are sometimes our complicities, because it's very clear in that story, it was the faith people, it was the priest and the Levite that walked past the injured man on the road.
You're bringing it home, Bishop, because sometimes our issue, our injuries are internal. Psychic injuries and mental injuries and spiritual injuries. We scab over on. You cut my arm, it'll scab over. But some of the injuries that we need to address aren't available to the eye. And I was thinking about when you're narrating that road, with the deja vu I had is you narrate I've never been to see the Jericho Road, but you describe it the way Dr. King describes it in terms of the torturous nature of the road. And what came to my mind is, in addition to helping the injured traveler, the public witness and the justice aspect of it is fixing the road and making the crooked path straight and leveling out the hills and raising the valleys so that people can have an unfettered access to the uncompromising grace of God that is administered and should be administered through each of us to each and every one without regard to person or station. And that unifying spirit, the ability to the calling to the gospel. It's hard to preach the gospel in a country where we've made valiant the very things that we're told, the sins that we're told to avoid: gluttony, covetousness, and all the things, and to get it out of that terminology. But we talk about capitalism, and all of the things that are considered that our spiritual teaching teaches us that are vices are, the world system tells us they're virtues, right? And so the justice aspect of it is, how do we straighten that road so that people can get to the grace and the sustenance that they need? And that's our work. And I just had that image as you were describing that road. I've never been on that road, but my public witness has been about trying to straighten the road for women and pregnant people to get to the services that they need. We're in the middle of a crisis of maternal mortality and infant mortality that are decimating poor folk, but decimating Black folk and brown folk, two communities that are often synonymous but not the same. And how the part of the issue is the road. We tell them what they need, but the road to get there is so burdensome that people die on the way.
What was of grave concern to me as the ministry that I've been blessed to participate in the early 1990s. We had what was then known as HIV and AIDS come through the community that I was serving and a part of, and changed the way I viewed ministry from that day to this, and had the opportunity to not only jump into what that meant. The congregation I served at that time had to struggle with the fact that one of our deacons had been diagnosed and now had a declaration of AIDS declared on him. And what were we going to do? Because he was the deacon in our church, and we struggled in the early in that early time to this real fact of our lives in the late 1980s, mid 1980s, and into the 90s. And for us, we did not turn our brother away. He was invited to serve for as long as he could serve, and then made transition, and we buried him with the dignity and grace of anybody in the service of our congregation, and I'm pretty proud of that. And we stood in the midst of a torrent of shame, bashing, and mean spiritedness that I had not before then ever experienced, for taking a stand of wrapping our arms around those that were considered on the margin. And it made it very clear that I would probably spend the rest of my life in ministry and work in that service, to take on what people tend to somehow say us and not them. All right, and we find our ways doing, that's how it happens in spiritual or faith communities, specifically here in the United States. Now, of course, we've exported that all over the world, right? And I've come to now know white supremacy and racism with a fair amount of seasoned with capitalism and neoliberalism, has called all that to be what it is. It is for me now. Here we are in 2023. That are struggling with some the same stuff that I had to deal with 40 years ago in ministry. My early parts of ministry, we were struggling at some of these access points. I'm gonna call it access points, where there is access for some, but not access for all, and we moralize it. Or let me say it this way: we put some Bible on it, we slap some Bible on it, or some God language. And then all of a sudden it's just right, when in fact it's the exact opposite, in my opinion, of what's right or what's moral. It's wrong and devilish. Could you talk just a little bit about that? Because it lifts us now out of just one version of this. You're talking about what you spent some of your life's blood and ministry in women's reproductive health. But I would say to you, as I know your ministry, it goes beyond that. This is just the part you played in this particular way. But these are terms and really conditions of ministry. We've got to, barriers, I'll call them, that we've got to work to do something different.
You're right on point, Bishop. I was thinking of a couple of things. One, we all labor in the vineyard that we're called to. I bring my gifts and talents as a physician and a scientist in an effort to be a scholar to bear. But I think a couple of things. One, the power of your witness and your prophetic voice from the pulpit. You reminded me of the words of somebody that we share a reverence for, Dr. Howard Thurman. And one of the things that helped me to develop the theology that empowered me to see reproductive decision making in the form of abortion as a grace and a blessing from God to be administered through my purpose was Howard Thurman said, like you said, we throw a little religion, a little Bible on it, and we sacralize it. Jesus said that you can paint a tomb white with pretty paint, but it's still dead on the inside. And Howard Thurman said that the things that are in religion that are true, they are in religion because they are true. Those things are not true simply because they're in religion. So I interpret that to say, we've taken patriarchy, we've taken homophobia, we've taken transphobia, and we've taken the very crass tool of biblical literalism and created theologies of oppression and desecration and decimation by taking these things and positing them in religious traditions and then putting them beyond scrutiny because we can say, I didn't say it, the Bible says it. And one of the things I used to react to viscerally was when some of my kinfolk who are devout Christians and biblical literalists would say, I hated the slogan, I love the sinner, but I hate the sin. I hate that you're gay. I love you, but I don't love your being gay. And one of the reasons I valued and honored our connection, Bishop, because I think it's even in on the question of reproductive rights, health, and justice, your voice is more important than my voice as a scientist. And I think one of the failures of the reproductive rights, health, and justice movement is that they have not engaged successfully with clergy who are prophetic as you are to call forth the truth and to say that there's nothing that you need or that you can do that will put you beyond the love of God. In the Psalms, David said that if I make my bed in hell, lo, you're there, right? And so I had one of my tasks for the women and pregnant people who see me was the same task you had 40 years ago, telling that deacon that, you know what, AIDS doesn't put you beyond the love of God. And so it doesn't put you out of fellowship with me, because the only way I know how to operate is within the context of the love of God. So I will embrace you. And what I have to convince women and pregnant people of is that when they ask me, Bishop, do you think God's going to forgive me for killing my baby? I have to say, first, I don't presume to speak for God, but I believe that if you think you need forgiveness for accepting the grace of God to meet your need in this moment, if you have courage enough to forgive yourself, I'm sure that God's better at forgiving than you are. And if you can forgive yourself, it's a pretty sure bet that God will forgive you too. And I'm not speaking for God. I haven't answered a theological question. What I've given her permission is to understand, accept that the wholeness and the oneness of God that we all need to be practicing. And I think we need more prophetic clergy voices, because as a scientist, people don't come to the academy, and they don't go to the hospital to figure out how they feel values wise about the things that they need. But when you can tell them that, go my child, as Jesus said to the woman about at the well, the woman who was taken in adultery, that was being stoned by men, and she says, Lord, he says, where are your accusers? Does not anybody else condemn you? She said, no, Lord, neither do I. Go and be whole. So we have to not let people impair our ability to share the gospel. And the gospel is not proselytizing to your religious tradition. The gospel is the good news that God administers grace and healing and sustenance and providence to any and everybody, irregardless of your faith tradition, irregardless of your gender, irregardless of your sexual orientation. There's nothing you have, do, or can be that will put you beyond the love of God. And that's the only gospel that I know, and that's the gospel that I hear when I hear you speak, Bishop.
Well, I appreciate that, but I hear the gospel in what you say as well. You were talking, and it reminded me of this poem by I think it's Daisy Reinhardt. I know for sure, according to several friends, I've heard reference this poem. It was a favorite poem of Dr. King, and it said something like this. It says, "I'm tired of sailing my little boat far inside the harbor bar. I want to be out where the big ships float, out on the deep where the great ones are. And should my frail craft prove too slight from for storms that drift those wide sea over, better go down in the stirring fight than drowns to death by the sheltered shore."
Mm.
I recently heard this referenced by the Reverend Dr. Paul Smith, who was a colleague and a classmate of Ambassador Andy Young, and became a student and later a colleague of Dr. Benjamin Mays, who was a mentor to Dr. King at Morehouse College. And so he was talking of this poem, and he said, Dr. Mays said he would change the two lines of that poem. Instead of it better go down in this stirring fight than drowns to death by the sheltered shore, he said, rather go to hell by choice than to drift into heaven with the crowd.
Mm. You sound, that sounds like I went to school with Bishop Tutu's daughter, and my one grace that I did not have, my schoolmate was purposing to have me meet him. I just wanted him to touch his hands and to experience the blessing of a living saint. But it turns out that one of his daughters, who's engaged in ministry, was a same-sex loving person. And the bishop, who is a moral authority on par, unrivaled in his moral authority, said, he said, if God doesn't love gay people, and if there's I'd rather go to hell than to go to a homophobic heaven. I'd rather not. If God doesn't love gay people, and hell and heaven. Hell is the only place for those of us who can't understand that. I'd rather go to hell than to go to a homophobic heaven. And
Yeah,
I hear in substance the same thing. And we've got to get to that point where in our sacred traditions that that the cultural practices that are being deposited, that are having a thin veneer of religiosity over them, and that are asking us to honor human traditions that are in violation of heavenly laws. We've got to be willing to accept the penalty of disobeying. Uh, as Paul said, "Do I persuade now men or God? If I yet serve mankind or the system, I would not be the servant of God."
that's
And
right.
there are people like you in the pulpit where Dr. King said, "Y'all can run me out of here, but all I can do is tell the truth." God called me to tell the truth that I'm telling. You know, you may
Yeah,
not like it, and you can run me out of here, but you cannot put me out of the kingdom of God. You cannot revoke my obligation to be a truth teller.
that's right. That's right. That's in fact his sermon and his argument in that sermon of I'm a drum major for freedom.
Mhm.
I'm a drum major for justice. He makes that very argument that and this is the conversation that I think we've got to be engaged in these days. There are issues of our day. There's poverty
Mhm.
that continues to run rapid, while there are others who are in conversations that I think are just hold on just a second. I don't quite know what's going on here, but there we go. There are conversations that need to be had. I've been in the conversation around police brutality and police overreach. I've been in the conversation about education, and public education in particular, where our institutions are not very interested in actually educating.
Mhm.
Right,
Mhm.
we're very much interested in. I had a woman said it's about the toilet paper, and you know how old people say stuff and you don't know what they're talking about, and later on, you once you get the punchline, right,
Mhm.
then you're able to think, they had it right, but I was tripping, and I don't know what I was talking about. They got it right.
Mhm.
I'm now, I'm 62 now,
Mhm.
60 as well. Let me say it that
Mhm.
way. And now I'm understanding things a little bit different. And what so we got police violence, we got education, we got mass incarceration. Michelle Alexander said to us, over a decade ago, man, this new Jim Crow
Mhm.
is much different, and yet is just as insidious as the old Jim Crow, Jim and
Mhm.
Jane Crow. In my opinion, we've got work to do, and that's why this poem of Daisy Reinhardt is so meaningful to me. That we're in these what she named as sheltered shore,
Mhm.
these sheltered shores where we're not. Many of us are not taking the risk to be prophetic, if you will,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
can I ain't trying to be overly spiritual and deep. I am a preacher, so I can make that claim, if you will. But I think just some things is just it's just right. It's not rocket science that many of our urban centers where Black and brown people live are also occupied by force, by these agencies of the government. It's something wrong with that. It's something wrong with people who are unhoused, right? Not because they want to be unhoused. They are unhoused because the systems are in place to keep them locked out of housing. People ought to be able to work if they want to work. We got enough resource to provide for folk, not just work, gainful employment, and
Yes.
and then at a living wage.
Yes.
There's enough resource to do that. Food shouldn't be lacked
Yeah.
in not nowhere in the world, but for sure it shouldn't be lacked here in the United States of America,
Yeah.
and yet it is. And
Yes.
and so when I raise my voice, or when I step into whatever limelight there is, or even just to dare to say it over the pulpit, or to say it in community meetings, or to say it on the streets. Listen, we have there are some the preamble to the Constitution says we have some inalienable rights.
Mm-hmm.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Old Tom Jefferson wrote in that sacred text of our America, and they gloss over the fact that and they want to shut it down, that he owned enslaved Africans,
Mm-hmm.
one of which who birthed children not just in his name. They look like him. They got the Blair nose. They look them black children of his look, those descendants look just like he does. And then the white one descendants wanted to say, well, you got to prove it. I'm looking at the same face that we now have of Thomas Jefferson in those same children, both white and of color. It's and then to ask people to own that, to even to tell the truth of it, in some way, somehow disregards or somehow puts a stain that people are tired of talking about it. Well, I'm not tired of talking about it, and in fact, it is the truth of that we must continue to struggle with. We stay at them shelter shores. Well, we might be on our way to heaven or on our way to hell.
It's interesting. I was listening, and thinking about the book by the brother. I just saw him at a conference. The book, The Politics of Jesus, by
Aubrey Hendricks.
Dr. Hendricks, and when he lays out the historical context of it contemporizes our call to ministry and the gospel, when he looked at the oppressive poverty of the Jewish people in occupied Jerusalem and Palestine, where the intimate association between the temple system and the Roman government extracting wealth out of the community, where people over half of the people lived in abject poverty, and they were taking more from the people who didn't have through the need to purchase pigeons to bring your sacrifice and all of that, and that rage and that activism of Jesus overturning the tables related to what enrages us in this moment. The things that you just described, to what degree do they enrage us to do something that would be disruptive of a system that is steamrolling the people in our community? The whole idea of Jesus, Dr. King said, why Jesus called the rich man a fool, that one of the abiding things, he says, the man, Dives didn't go to hell because he was rich. Dives went to hell because he failed to recognize that his wealth was his opportunity. Our indictment against us nationally, and we are so caught up in personal and individual salvation. That's why the notion of a meritocracy in this country, like pull yourself by your own bootstraps. But all of the contracts and the covenants that God made with his people, it wasn't with David, it was with the house of David. It wasn't with Moses, it was with the house of Moses. So all of those decisions and covenants were community-based covenants. But Moses was the point person. But God's covenant with us, and the promise to for the gospel to bring us good news. Our marching orders is to the year of Jubilee. The spirit of the Lord is upon us, Bishop. It calls us to release the captives, and to make education, to decommodify education, to democratize education, to make healthcare a right, to understand that the most essential freedom is the freedom to self-determination. And so any law that violates your notion of your person and your right to self-determination is not a moral law. So it's not a law at all. So those of us, how can we be morally? I've never decided, Bishop, why the decision to provide abortion care for women, for me, the most essential determination of that decision was not related to the legal status of that service. It was related to the moral and ethical content of what it means to be empowered and to be able to do something that I know can alleviate human suffering. And I have a moral obligation to do that, which is a higher law than whether or not I'm going to be prosecuted for doing right. So we are in a space where is our outrage? Not sympathy, but compassionate action. Compassion moves you to act.
Mm-hmm.
It moves you to act. And so we have to have a vision that will allow us to no longer simply to be pissed off and angry, but to be productive. We can't just have a blowtorch. We can't have a flamethrower. We can't burn everything down. We have to bring our energy to a precise flame. A blowtorch will allow you to do work. You can cut precise. A flamethrower just burns up everything. And we're in a moment where people who are race baiting are pouring gas on a fire. But how do we keep our wits about us when everybody else around us is losing theirs and blaming it on us? I
Yeah,
think that's the call. That's the prophetic call.
that's exactly right. I find it vastly interesting that people will ask of me, what do I think about this or that? And I have opinions about it. Most of whatever they've asked me, I do have an opinion about it. But whatever my opinion is, the real question is, what is your opinion?
Mm-hmm.
And what is God calling for you? What is your moral center? What or in Thurman-esque conversation, what is your North Star?
Yeah.
Where's your true north, right? What's leading you down a road, down the path that's not traveled by a whole lot of people? Let me say it that way. What's causing you to step away from the sheltered shore into the struggle in a way that may cause you to get out there in the deep? And we talk about Peter walking on that water, but I like Bro Peter. At least he said, "Bid me come," and he started walking for a while. It was only when he started to see what he wasn't looking at, and he got his eye and his focus off of Jesus. Now I know I'm preaching again. I know. For me, the question is, if we're going to talk real talk about the struggles of our day, and there are plenty of issues. There's political rancor of which we've not seen in a millennia, in a century rather, in a century. This kind of rancor may not even exist in back when we fought the Civil War.
It feels unprecedented in this moment. It feels unprecedented.
It does. I mean, there's no policy passed. There's no bills passing in DC. All right now. The debt ceiling is a conversation that they delayed. We're gonna go right up to it again this time. The parties, they don't, they speak to some and don't speak to most, and and then we're not even talking about what's happening in states that we live in. I mean, here in quote liberal Connecticut, we got the kind of rancor. We ain't passing a whole lot of bills. And then here's the other thing that our folk who are watching us will hear because they've heard it before. Listen, we pass laws and we don't even worry about how do we make sure in the passing of the policy and the law we build in accountability so that we do what we wanted, that the law said we were supposed to do. And how do we know we right on it if we don't put in there a way to both have some accountability, but also put some money on it so that accountability actually can do the common good? I'm sick of this. Let's do it in name, right? Let's say, okay, this is right, but then we don't put no teeth in the law so that we can follow it up, right? Yeah. So there is so much. And here's another thing that's just my pet peeve. This may not be an issue with you, but it's an issue with me. Whole lot of folk talking. You got lots to say around the dinner table. You got lots to talk about at the barbershop and the beauty shop. You got lots to say on the street corner. But then when you ask, are you registered to vote to help us get the right people in there that'll have the right kinds of conversations, that'll put together the right policies that then lead us to laws and the passage of laws, then it go quiet, because now all of a sudden you ain't registered. You don't vote on a regular basis. So you're not participating in this representative form of a republic we call democracy.
Well, I think the most effective, far more effective than a voter ID law, is the breeding of cynicism in people about the system. They've been able to convince those of us who would benefit the most from voting that voting doesn't matter. And the people who understand that if you do three things, that no matter how small your numbers are, you make a difference and you matter. If you vote, if you donate time, and if you donate resources, those are the three things that matter. So when we wax cynical about the system, Dr. King said the most beautiful social experiment ever conceptualized is democracy. He said the sad reality is we've never practiced it. And we are allowing people to undermine our ability to make the effort to practice democracy. And for me, I'm to the left of the left, Bishop, which means that I'm the same kind of socialist that Jesus was, right? So that's the dirty word. People who, for many people, Jesus is their mascot and not their master. So Jesus has become the mascot of the United States political parties in terms of the Christian right, because they don't hear anything that Jesus said in the Great Commission or in the Gospel or the Sermon on the Mount. They don't want to hear that. So, rather than being vested in the red, the blue, the elephant, or the donkey, I think where we are, Bishop, is where what I heard you making reference to is, who is that? The dead poet said the revolution will not be televised, or was that Richie? Which was that? Was that the dead poet? Who said the revolution will not be televised? The reason the revolution can't be televised is because the place the revolution has to start, it has to be a revolution of values.
That's right. We talking about Gil Scott Heron. The
right.
revolution will not be televised.
So the revolution has to start. If the revolution doesn't start in here and in your conscience and your mind, if you don't have a new mindset, new thoughts, creating new actions, the revolution will never materialize. But I believe I believe that divine order is at play. I believe that we will fall upward. I believe that, as Dr. King said, when the civil rights workers in Georgia were disenchanted because Lester Maddox, one of the most vicious governors in the South, would do a political setback, and the workers said, "I'm just done. Why should we keep working? Every time we make 2 steps forward, Lester Maddox sets us 3 steps back." And Dr. King looked at them in his prophetic and his pastoral wisdom. He said, "The last time I checked, God had not turned this world over to Lester Maddox."
Right.
And we have to draw that conclusion, even in the face of harsh political realities, that God has not turned this world over to the world system. The principalities and the powers and air, the political systems, the might makes right, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. God, that's one way of the world operating, but we don't have to operate that way. And the way that we have to choose to operate, that is a revolutionary tactic, is the sole force of love. And love is what, as your brother and our brother Cornell said, love is what justice is what love looks like in public.
So, I love that phrase. I
can say I love you, Bishop, or I can say let's fight for justice together. I'm saying the same thing.
That's right. That's right. He says tenderness is what love looks like in private. Justice is what love looks like in public. I love that, and I love that analogy. That analogy works for me. It is the expression again. Thurman is my guy. He's my
Yeah,
go-to. He's my deep one. He's my teacher.
sure, sure.
He says there is a spirit abroad in the life of which those of us who are of faith. He named it Judeo-Christian ethic.
Hmm.
But it's only, he said, that's only one expression. He said
Yes,
there's a spirit that makes for wholeness and community. You
yes,
started early on in our conversation talking about that we have this responsibility, and of course when you start talking about the Good Samaritan, it makes it very clear to me that there is a communal aspect
hmm
to this conversation. You have spent the vast majority of your life, witness, and work in the field of women's reproductive health,
hmm
and you've taken some risk. There are people who were doing what you do, who ended up dead
yeah,
because there were people who were of ill will, and of course, I believe of ill motive. And maybe even tainted or anyway, I don't want to.
sure.
They were tools of those who wanted to stop what I believe is a, you may disagree, that's what America is about, allegedly. That we
Hmm.
can live with diverse opinions. We can live in a space and place where we don't always have to agree, but where we do and where we can come around is the idea that in mutual cooperation with each other, we can decide, okay, I believe it this way, you believe it that way. Can we come to the somewhere in the middle so that we can all be together, and we can grow together and learn together, and maybe over time, we could, we could coexist instead of the Hatfields and the McCoys, and where
Hmm.
we never get to the bottom of one, who started the fight and who will end the fight. And so we're in this constant state of pull, 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 and we never come to the space of reconciliation, or I like it the way Paul talked about it in Romans, the place of
Hmm.
peace. And that's not the absence of struggle.
Hmm.
Yep, right. But there is a peace that you can have as you move through the world, and I think that's when we are in bonded community one with each other.
Yeah.
For me, it's not rocket science.
But you say that, Helen Keller, who was from Alabama and who was a miraculous person in terms of, she couldn't see and she couldn't hear, but her mind was brilliant and she figured out ways to communicate. And there are people who would try, and she was uh, uh, agnostic at best, but was a truth teller and was a deeply uh, spiritual person, if not a religious one. And she said something that just revolutionized uh, Philippians 4:13. She gave me another understanding. I think it's the peace of God which passes all understanding should keep your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Helen Keller once said in response to somebody offering her that verse, she said, "I don't want, I don't want the peace that surpasses all understanding. I want the understanding that brings about peace," which is a different way. The problem that I've always had with the common ground, Bishop. I think we need to tone down our rhetoric, and I've never dug in. And for me, this is not the administering of the gospel and the administering of grace is not a rhetorical, or opinion position that I hold. When people tell me that, like Trump tried to create the false equivalency and down in Charlottesville, and said there are good people on both sides. When people say, let's find the common ground, if the common ground that you're asking me to stand on is the dignity and health and well-being of women and pregnant people with regard to reproductive decision making, then I'm not willing to stand on the backs of people who are oppressed and have conversations about them without them being involved in the conversation. I'm not willing to sit in a room and have a theoretical or a thought experiment with somebody who will never think deeply about pregnancy. You or I, Bishop, can't even think deeply about an unplanned pregnancy because we can never have one. And I will contend to you that even people with a uterus don't think seriously about what to do with an unplanned pregnancy until it's in their uterus. So everybody has a hypothetical or theoretical position about what they think that they would do if they were in the position, but you can't say that until you're in the position. So our place has to be the only ground that I'm willing to stand on with regard to whether or not people should eat, whether or not people should have an education, whether or not people should control the reproductive capacities of their bodies, is any ground that validates and honors the sanctity of that humanity of that person, that entitles to them to all those things. If we can't stand in a place where we can figure out how to make those things happen, I'm not willing to stand in conversation with you to figure out whether or not they should happen. So I'm part of my obligation as a thinking person who follows the Palestinian Jew and who follows the revolution of love that he initiated and that calls us to, in bringing that into a creative tension with my thinking as a scientist and as a scholar. It brings me to what Dr. King said about the false tension that we create between science and religion. He said that science gives mankind knowledge, which is power. And I won't police his language. Religion gives mankind wisdom, which is control. Science deals with facts. Religion deals with values. The two are not enemies. And I think part of the false tension and the false equivalency that we have is that we are allowing people to bring into the public space around policy, where policy should be evidence and data driven. It's unequivocal when people have a living wage that they can take care of themselves. It's unequivocal that when people have adequate nutrition and adequate education, that they are more productive and they can participate in the Commonwealth. The problem comes in is when we allow people to try and answer scientific questions with religious answers, and we allow people to try and answer religious answers with scientific questions. Right? You, as a scientist, I can't talk to somebody about their soul and where that'll end up. A bishop, as a pastor, and as somebody who is trained in pastoral care and who understands sacred texts and who understands spiritual traditions, I can talk about that to them from my experience. But when it comes to answering questions that are about their sense of why and their purpose about being here, my job as a scientist is to create the capacity for them to live with purpose. Your job is to help them to find it. Those questions are not mutually exclusive and they're not interchangeable.
That's exactly right. And for me, it is when we can be in dialogue one with the other, where we can find, have some shared language, maybe.
Yes.
Or some shared understanding. I love Helen Keller for that. Some shared, I want some understanding too. I'm not looking for a peace that passes understanding. I want to understand it so I can have some peace. I'm with that. I'm with that. It for me, it leads me to the places and spaces that I have been throughout the journey of both ministry and life. That we struggle with what are real, true. I don't have all the answers, and I'm the first to admit that. There's plenty of stuff I don't know nothing about. But what I do know some things, right? And I have had some experience now, and now that I can lean into my eldership a little bit, I've seen God do some stuff. I've watched spirit work in some ways. I've watched the trajectory of lives go from over here to over here, and I've witnessed that. And for me now, it's about the public witness that we can bring to issues that are important. A number of years ago, the political litmus test for those in this country were on the fault lines were drawn around gay folk and abortion. And we have lived now to see that kind of be obliterated. And there are some who won't let that go to save their lives and mine and yours as well. They want to hold on to this kind of political narrative that says you are a true Christian because you, and I have found them to be white nationalists.
Mm-hmm.
And the white Christian nationalists that continue to harangue that level of it's our brother Bishop Barber calls it spiritual malpractice,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
so in the same way, I think we can hold the ground to say that God loves all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That the love of God is available to all of us. And in fact, and I mean all of us in all of our different ways, in all of our different forms, and in all of our different inner and outer spaces, right? And that it is up to us to then in community figure out how we live together and how we live together so that all of us move and grow and have our being together. And I think, that's and it's not just a spiritual question in the four walls of our houses of worship. That's a community question about what does it mean to live and to coexist together.
To reference both of our backgrounds as country boys, Bishop, me probably a little more directly than you, if we know that when you're weeding a garden, you can chop off the top of the weeds, but if you don't get down and get the root, the weeds are going to spring right back up. And one of the places where I think we've been negligent or where this might be a mic drop, and this you might have to put out this fire, Bishop, when I started, is one of the places where we have to be careful to root out white supremacy, the weed of white supremacy, is in Black mentality. We are interested in having white people to stop practicing, people with white skin to stop practicing white supremacy. How do we get people of color with skins of color to stop practicing white supremacy? And Dr. King used to say, you know what? He told Harry Belafonte about a couple of weeks before he died. It was published posthumously in his "Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos of Community." He said, Harry, I think probably one of the greatest disservices I've done in terms of fighting so hard for integration and civil rights is I've been asking Black people as they get their heads beat in to run into a house that's on fire. America's a house that's on fire. And, some of us think that we are going to earn or educate or politic our way out of being the objects of white supremacy. And for those who some of us have taken the notion of if you can't beat them, join them. So a pastor in Louisville said that the ultimate transformation is to put a white supremacist mentality in a Black body. That person can do far more damage. Any efforts that we have towards self-determination and agency can be undermined from within by people who hold a mentality, because we should not be confused, as I've heard you say before, we should not be confused to think that white supremacy is about white skin. It's about the corruption of the values based on colonial expansion and domination. That's a mentality that anybody who succumbs to human vices of greed and avarice and the failure to see kinship in other human forms, your willingness to kill to acquire things, is related to the virus of white supremacy that has nothing to do with the color of your skin.
Mm-hmm. I am a believer of this, brother. We have went way past our hour, so we're gonna have to shut this down in just a little bit. But I'm reminded you. This is what happens when folk like you and me get together. We play off each other, and you spark so much in me in this conversation. I'm reminded Dr. King talked about at one point when good folk. He says when evil folk plot,
good people must plan.
They plan. When some folk burn and bomb, some of us got to be about building and binding. He says when some of us shout ugly words of hatred and jealousy, there's some of us got to commit ourselves to the glory of love, right? That while there are some who would seek to somehow perpetrate the unjust status quo, some of us have to be about bringing together the real order of justice. right?
Yes.
And I'm that's where I'm committed at. And for all of the rest of the life that the Lord God gives me, I want to that's the lane I want to be in. I want to be pulling, folk to come on, let's build. Come on,
Yeah.
let's bind together. Come on, let's love one another. Come on, let's really be about what it means to be to create some justice and some just paths, right? Not just us, but justice, right? It's got to be a way that happens. And for me, in the end, that's what's going to be that's going to be the key. Dr. King talked about the deep abiding love. And I believe all of our activity, all of our advocacy, all of our activism, all of our right doing, our moral calls, and all of it, it's got to be about somehow acknowledging that there's a disconnect. I was just in a recent meeting with some political leaders and some servants of our community. And I said, with all of the systems and processes you all have, there's an obvious disconnect because what you have named as this is what we do to keep everything right and in order, folk in the community, and one, don't have that same opinion of you, but two, you ain't keeping it in order. We don't believe you. So there's some kind of disconnect here. And we're here to acknowledge that there's a disconnect and to show ourselves at least friendly. The book say, if you want some friends, you got to kind of be friendly.
Yeah.
You got to be. So can we find ways to be friendly so that not just you and me are better, but you, me, and everybody, as my people would say down in St. Louis, everybody be better.
I think the first step towards that, Bishop, is you and I have, it's clear that we are both deeply Kingian and Thurmanites.
That's right, Thurmanites. That's exactly right.
But a story that helped me to turn down. I was recently stopped at the store to get some flowers for my wife for Mother's Day, and was waiting for a parking space and as I was parked waiting for this guy to pull out, he happened to be a white gentleman, and I'm making a confession as I tell this story. When he pulled out, he had enough room. I could have left him a little more room, but I couldn't give him any more room because the person right behind me wouldn't move. So as he's pulling out, he's swearing, he's calling me all kinds of MFs and SOBs and telling me to back up. And I'm telling him that I can't back up. And he says, you have more room. And he's swearing at me. And I said, you have a nice day. And he says, F you. And he drives off. And I felt inflamed because I felt like there was some epigenetic amping up that, how dare this white boy talk to me like that? And in that moment that I forgot that I was a follower of the Palestinian Jew and had this impulse to want to follow him, to say, it's real easy to be brave in a car when you're going 50 miles an hour. There's 10 of y'all, because usually, you wouldn't talk to me that way if we were looking eye to eye. And in that moment, the Spirit kind of convicted me and says, you know what? If you let ego win, ego can drive you. But I was remembered in that moment a story from Dr. King about he and his brother AD were driving west, going to California, and they were driving on the highway. And we both know that the history of Black folk driving at night because they didn't want to deal with white folk during the day, because in those times you never knew where that was going to end up. And so for sport, truck drivers would sometimes, they knew Black people in a pedestrian car were driving at night, they would turn their high beams on to blind. And so AD was driving and he was kind of inflamed. He said, I'm tired of every time these truck drivers come and they throw their high beams on. I know the next time somebody throws their high beams on, I'm going to throw my high beams on. And Dr. King said, oh, no, don't do that. Because that would be that if you throw your high beams on and they throw their high beams on, there'll be too much light on this highway. And that could end up in mutual destruction. He said, somebody's got to have sense enough to dim their lights. And so if we're going to be bridge builders in the daily microaggression, what they now call racism light, I guess, of people devaluing you and disrespecting you and feeling empowered to do that, especially since the 2016 election, you've got to stay centered. If you're a bridge builder, you've got to have sense enough to dim your lights. That doesn't mean becoming a doormat. That doesn't mean false humility and self-deprecation. It doesn't mean preferring somebody and deeming that they're more important than you are. It means that if you're going to bring about the revolution, at first has to start in you. And that revolution will give you the ability to dim your lights. And then you will, like Madea says in Tyler Perry's character, it ain't what they call you, it's what you answer to. So we can build the bridges, but we've got to have the moral fortitude and the discipline to dim the lights. In this moment where people are race baiting and fomenting hatred, and people shooting teenagers on steps because they were at the wrong door because they were there to pick up their niece or their nephew. Somebody's got to have sense enough to dim the lights. And while we dim the lights, we have to find ways to call for a government and a policing style that will protect us and support us, versus, as you and I both know, that we oftentimes feel pinned in by policing in our communities. We are kept out of the better neighborhoods. But if we are going to build bridges, we got to dim the lights, and we got to understand that we cannot shake hands with a closed fist, as Gandhi would say. So we can do it, but we got the revolution starts with us first.
Absolutely. Listen, y'all see why I call him a bootleg preacher? He got the call on him.
Shade tree mechanic.
That's right, shade tree mechanic. I appreciate you, brother. Thank you for coming on and being willing to say yes. Obviously, I'm going to invite you back, and I hope you'll be willing to come, and we'll chop it up some more, as the churn say. It is my esteemed honor to call you my brother and friend, and appreciate you so very much. You're doing God's work, brother, in spaces and places across the South, bringing reproductive and women's health to women and families, and it is a courageous work. It's sometimes a little sketchy, and yet you have been willing to risk on what it might mean to do what you believe God has really destined you to do. And I deeply admire and I bear witness to what I believe is the God and the spirit of justice that works in you. And if more of us would do that, you know, I'm gonna put a period on this thing just for a moment, because it really is just a comma. Thurman said in probably his most famous quotables, he speaks about, you know, the question is not, you know, what does the world need, but what makes you come alive, and do that, because what the world really needs is for you to turn up and come alive. I'm paraphrasing that quote, but that's, for me, these are the times now where the folk that want to profess faith show up in the action mode, show up in what it is that you're willing to do, and that means sometimes taking some risk. And so I applaud you, brother. You're doing that, and we will continue to pray for you. We ask that you continue to pray with us, and certainly we will meet on these justice streets out here doing what it is that we do. God bless you, man. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you, my brother. Blessings.
Yes, sir.
And
yes, sir.
Blessings to you.
All righty. We'll see y'all next time. Listen, we're going to be talking about some more relevant stuff the next time you tune in. That's what we're going to be doing. All right. God bless you all. Peace.
God bless.